Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're glad you're joining us this week. We have a fascinating guest, first time ever for me, talking to a eighth degree black belt master instructor. And we used to watch the same TV show when we were kids. And we're going to talk about that. But today we have Chris Natzke, eighth degree black belt master instructor, former national Taekwondo champion, U.S. champion. Is a life leadership coach, keynote speaker, and Amazon #1 best-selling author. And his mission in life is to transform lives through his unique brand of black belt leadership. In fact, he calls it the 7 qualities of black belt leadership. And that's what we're going to get in today is the mindset and changing lives. Chris, welcome to the show. It's so awesome to have you here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Thanks, Pat. I'm as well. Thanks so much for having me.
So turns out we, as we were talking offline, I teased, like, man, when I was a kid, I watched David Carradine and Kung Fu, the TV show, and in your bio, you talk about how that kind of was your initial inspiration. And I'm using your words that you were a chubby 10-year-old who watched Kung Fu on TV and you begged your mom, hey, this is what I want to do. At Paul Harvey, what's the rest of the story?
Well, great question. And that really is the story. I mean, in fact, I don't know if you were aware of it during that time when we were growing up, but martial arts wasn't like it is today, where you see a school on every corner, right?
Right.
And I grew up in a little town 30 miles west of Milwaukee. So just so happened there was a community center program in martial arts. And it was the David Carradine Kung Fu series that got me all excited. And then I found out about this club that was meeting. And I remember the exact day I started. It was September 13th, 1973. The reason I remember that date is my brother's 5th birthday. And I begged my mom, I had to get out of his party to go to the and what's so funny about that is, today, and I ran a school for 17 years, parents come, they sign release forms. Well, this was in the early 70s. The community center was 4 or 5 blocks from my house. My mom said, all right, go ahead and come on back when you're done. So I went, they let me train. And I share this when I do my keynote talk. I went there and I saw these people doing these amazingly powerful movements. And I felt like I came home. And that was really it. And it was something I just felt like it was speaking to me in a way that nothing else had ever spoken to me. And then later on, I would meet the man that would really change my life, who was my Korean Taekwondo instructor, Grandmaster J.K. Lee. And he's the one that really transformed me and helped me really be seen, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of took me under his wing. I became like his son. And that was the man that had the most profound impact on my life.
Wow. It's kind of a flashback for me a little bit, not to being a kid, but our oldest son. He took after his mother, short, skinny. He's 43 years old now, still only weighs $125. But so he was a little guy, and he wasn't getting bullied or anything like that. But he's had the same kind of draw to the martial arts, and literally 4 or 5 blocks down the street from us, we lived in a small town in Troy, Ohio. And so he went down there and started in Taekwondo. And I think if I recall correctly, green belt, he was drawn to it. But then he got enamored a bit with Tang Sudo.
Oh, okay.
And so he got belts in both. And then he discovered baseball. Okay. And he was left-handed and a left-handed pitcher and a little guy, and everybody's like, oh, you can't. And he was so focused and what's the word I want to use? Methodical. I mean, when he was 3 years old, he was building Lego things that were for 9 to 10-year-olds. He couldn't even read. He'd just look at the box, dump the stuff out, and then build whatever was on the box. Right. And so he became very fascinated with baseball and gave up the martial arts thing to be a baseball player. So that kind of what you were saying about the that you felt like you came home. For him, it was the katas, all the things that he learned,
Sure.
the discipline and whatnot, really resonated with him.
Well, and I would imagine, I mean, because this was my experience, the martial arts really helped him in baseball. I mean,
Yeah.
it helped me. I was a football player. I ended up going to college on a football scholarship, and I think I was a good athlete. But what made me really good was my martial art training. You know, naturally, I was a good athlete, but it wasn't like I was fantastic. But it was martial arts that helped up level all the other skills that I had, which made me, you know, be able to, you know,
Yeah.
compete at that level.
I'm laughing because it's remember Lynn Swan?
Oh, of course.
Pittsburgh Steelers. My wife's from Pittsburgh, so it's like she has a whole shrine of Pittsburgh Steelers stuff. But I remember when Lynn Swan actually, and I think it was after he retired, he actually said, "Oh, I took ballet lessons
Ballet. I was going to say that. Yeah.
to be a better receiver
Huh.
and control my
That's right.
body on those sideline catches and stuff."
Sure.
So, so I come from a world where all tactics flow from philosophy. Having been in
Yep.
law enforcement,
Mhm.
so street survival and all the different tactics, whether it's the SWAT stuff or just engaging with people and avoiding to have to fight them. Um, what's the philosophy of Taekwondo and the martial arts that you're the 8th degree black belt? What's the philosophy that drives the tactics, and then how are you then translating that into non-martial arts
Yeah.
people's lives?
Sure. Well, you know, that's a very broad question, right? And I
Yeah,
can't say there's one philosophy, but I think there are several. I think that one of the things that I've grown to really realize and to also teach and hopefully live is that martial arts becomes a metaphor for life, right?
yeah,
So the way, and I'm sure your son saw this too, you know, martial arts is much more than just kicking and punching, right?
mm,
In Taekwondo, we have what we call the Taekwondo tenets: courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, indomitable spirit. So those are the guiding principles by which we, you know, we live our lives. And it doesn't mean that we never fall off course. It just means that's the North Star, if you will.
yeah.
And you know, another thing that I speak a lot about this too. One of my in parts of my keynote is that, you know, a black belt is a white belt that never quit. So this whole idea,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
of
no, yeah,
perseverance
absolutely.
and moving through obstacles. And that doesn't mean that we don't have strategies and tactics to make it easier and more efficient. But, you know, I've taught at this point in time probably 10,000 students in my career over 5 decades, and have over 2,000 students that have got their black belt with me.
Wow.
And I can think of only two, Pat, only two students that when they first started with me had all the skills necessary to be a black belt: focus, concentration, flexibility, tenacity. Only two. And one got their 4th degree black belt and one got their 2nd degree black belt with me. But what about the other 1,998, right? They just kept showing up. They just kept showing up. And in fact, when I look at it objectively and I look at who became some of my best students and also some of the best martial art teachers I've developed, they were oftentimes the people that had the most challenge when they were first starting their martial art training. They didn't have the balance, they didn't have the coordination, they didn't have the self-confidence. But over time, that began to build. And then they became great teachers and great black belts because they understood what the difficulties were that
Hmm.
other people might be going through as well. And they had a much greater sense of empathy when they were teaching.
Wow. I think one of the things, and I'm betting this is your experience, is in the human condition, we want safety, security, prosperity, and control. And the
Mhm.
biggest one is probably control, because you want control over your safety, your
Right.
security, your prosperity, and
Yeah.
you want control over circumstances and whatnot. It, has it been your experience in the martial arts, whether it's Taekwondo or uh, you know, uh, we actually took a class in law enforcement called verbal judo,
Yes,
and
yes,
and
I'm
it
familiar with
was,
it.
and we took it from the guy that created George Thompson himself,
Okay.
before he had sold the business and later passed away. But the whole idea, the judo philosophy was, deflect and redirect. And
Mhm.
so in the verbal world, how can you use the skills of judo, the tenets, principles, to deflect and redirect when somebody is trying to engage you in a verbal confrontation? Um, how does martial arts translate from that control, that desire to have control
Mhm.
over yourself and your situation? What are the things about martial arts that develops that holistic control in somebody's
Mhm.
life?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, boy, that's just we could talk a whole hour on that topic right there. I'm not only thinking from a martial arts standpoint, but from also a self-defense standpoint. And I teach a course that deals with nonverbal, or I'm sorry, with verbal a confrontation and how to not only de-escalate, but use your voice in a powerful way. And maybe I'll get to that in a moment. I think the first thing that martial arts does, and this happened to me soon after I began. I opened my school in 1995, and I started seeing this phenomenon every once and again with kids, particularly young boys that were coming to me because they were being bullied. And what I realized is when I would follow up, they came there because he was getting picked on at school. We would start to, teach them our methodologies, and then I'd always check in, and maybe 6, 8 weeks later, I'd say, "Well, how's it going with the bullying?" And 9 times out of 10, they'd say, "Well, it doesn't happen anymore." Now, they didn't punch the bully in the nose.
Yeah.
They didn't use any of that, right?
Yeah.
But what happened is that they began exuding more confidence, and they began standing taller and looking people in the eye, et cetera. And they'll oftentimes say that 80% of our communication is done non-verbally, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
the transformation was happening just through the confidence they were exuding. And you know what? Sometimes they may have been scared to death inside, but
Yeah.
just their body posture was making that communication, right? So I think that's a really important part. And oftentimes you'll say, martial arts is about control and all that kind of stuff, which it absolutely is. But I think that one of the best things we do is one of the first things you'll learn in a martial art class is to stand at attention. Well, what is it? That's, chin up, eyes forward, shoulders back, and you're beginning to train those postures. And then that's just, again, reinforced by the training, like, oh, wow, I'm feeling more powerful in my body. I
Hmm.
think that's one of the most, I think that there are a lot of children in particular nowadays, because there is a tendency for kids to be less physical than they
Hmm.
were when, say, you and I were growing up. We were out on our bikes in the neighborhood doing our things, and kids are now in front of PlayStations and things like that. But there is something to be said when you start to feel comfortable in your body, that it helps you exude. You just have a feeling of confidence overall that maybe you don't get if you're more sedentary.
Yeah. Every what you just said reminds me of when my wife and I. So I was born in Ireland, and and I'm a naturalized citizen, and we go back to Ireland, every 10 years or something. And the last time we were in Dublin, um, my wife reminded me. Now, Pat, remember when we're walking around Old Town Dublin, uh, don't act like a tourist. Yeah, don't be looking up and gawking
Right.
and stuff. And it's that whole nonverbal communication that you get pegged. Like that's the bullying.
That's right.
If you send off the lack of eye contact, your head down, and they just mark you as an easy target. And so what you were sharing, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember when we were walking. It was over near St. Stephen's Green. It's like, quit gawking, Pat.
That's
You look like a tourist.
That's
and,
right.
and
Well, in my self-defense classes that we teach, our organization where I did my training with, um, they went to 2 different federal prisons and interviewed sex offenders.
Mhm.
And they had them look at not only photographs, but videotape of specific people. And what they found in between those 2 penitentiaries, the 2 groups within a 97% accuracy rate picked the same people they'd engage with.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with their height, their weight, their build. It was all about they wouldn't make eye contact. They would walk with their shoulders down, smaller steps. They weren't exuding confidence, and they became the marks. So I think, you probably saw that in police work too,
Oh, yeah.
just in terms of how you were showing up physically. And we always talk, and I think this is important, not only in self-defense, but martial arts is, on the one scale, you have being passive, which is what we're talking about, showing that passivity in your body posture. Then on the other side, you may have someone who's showing off being aggressive. But what we want to do is we want to split that difference. We want to show up being assertive, right? We're confident. We want to de-escalate if we need to, but if we need to take care of ourselves, we can do that too.
Yeah. Which kind of leads me into for your experience and your journey is not only do you have that martial arts background and everything, you went and got a master's in spiritual psychology.
I did.
How was that? Because to marry or merge the martial arts with the spiritual psychological, what's the word I want to use? The transpersonal life that we all live, and how has that impacted your journey?
Great question. To a degree, yes, but even more so, what was happening with me, and I think that any good martial arts instructor, because we're always about personal development and expansion, we're always looking for, at least I was looking for that next way of personal development. And as a result of that, what was happening is I wasn't only teaching martial arts, but I was moving into public speaking. I was also moving into life coaching.
Okay.
And so what the degree in spiritual psychology did is it gave me the tools and the experiences so that I could not only work on my own things, so that I could make myself more powerful and more clear and more clean in terms of my approach to life. But I also then had the coaching experience that I could work with. And quite honestly, my martial arts students were my first guinea pigs, right? And in fact, several years ago, this person now is probably grown and has children of her own, but I had a young student, her name was Tara, and Tara had just tested for her second degree black belt. So she'd been with me and she's probably with me at that time for like 6-7 years. And she handed me a book as a thank you for helping her get ready for her belt test. And it was a book on positive affirmative affirmations. Yeah. And inside, when I opened it up, it said, "Dear sir, I saw this book and I thought of you because you've been teaching us all these same things all these years." Right. And that was one of the best gifts I ever got. So, again, using martial arts as a metaphor, many people will come to a martial arts studio for specific reasons. They want to be more confident. They want their kids to learn more respect and focus and concentration, self-defense, and all those are great. But the reason people stay in a martial art community is because of community and the benefits that they're getting beyond the physical the physical skills. Because kicking and punching can get old after a while. But when you're marrying that with a community as well as I've had parents in my office, Pat, come into me like with tears in their eyes saying, "Jimmy wants to quit, but he can't. You need to talk to him and keep him here because of all the things he's learning." Right. Yeah. So, that's when I knew I was doing my job.
That's awesome. So that kind of segues us in a kind of a natural way to the 7 qualities that you talk about. What are those qualities? Sure. And then we'll just go from there.
Absolutely.
What are those 7 qualities?
Well, and I'll give you just a little bit of the origin. Is when I was beginning to speak and out in the community and speak, because the way that I built my martial arts school, Pat, is I went to schools. I had 6 schools in a 2-mile radius, martial arts schools in a 2-mile radius of me. So in order to make myself stand out among the other schools, I do something different. It wasn't just a fancy yellow page ad at the time, right? Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'm relatively articulate and I can hold a crowd. And so I started going to all the grade schools and speaking. And one school would hear about me, then the next one would bring me in. I spoke a lot on nonviolent conflict resolution and bully proofing, et cetera. And so now I'm starting to get invited to speak at more adult events. And I thought, well, I need to take this message And so with a friend and mentor of mine, we helped me kind of draw out these 7 qualities that I was using all the time, but I wasn't able to put them in this structure.
Mhm.
And they became the theme of when I tested for my 7th degree black belt back in 2008. So this, 7 qualities, 7 degrees of black belt, etc. So, and I'm actually, if you're okay with it, I'm going to reference my book because I don't want to miss one of them.
Absolutely.
The first one is having what I call a purposeful vision. So being able to be very focused on where we want to go. Many people can articulate what they don't want to have happen in their lives, right? If you ask them when I've been in a coaching situation, they can articulate the negatives they don't want to have happen in their lives, but they're not clear about having a vision. And for us in martial arts, having that vision of getting your black belt, that was one of the key things they were using. So how do you apply that to your life? The second one is to be the change. And so what I mean by that is in our Western society in particular, we're very focused on the things that need to get done in order to get us where we want to go. And there's nothing wrong with action. In fact, martial arts, we'll call it an action philosophy. But so much of that can be not directed properly if we don't have a strong sense of being. If we want, I always say to, my students, and I speak about it, most of us live from a perspective of have, do, be. When I have enough money, then I'll do what I want to do and I'll be happy. When I have more time, then I'll do the things I said my kids I do and I'll be a better parent. Have, do, be, but where most people have it going is they turn those words around and they look at life from a perspective of be, do, have. You need to be more conscious, more considerate, more courteous, more outgoing, more adventurous. Be that way, then do the things that that support that way of being, and then you can have what you want in your life. So those are the first 2. And I don't know if you want to stop here and chit chat about those a little bit, if you want me to go on, but the whole idea of vision, and then because I'm a firm believer is that life doesn't happen to us, it happens through us. And when we have our mindset in a particular way, now it can flow through us. So that vision gets supported by our way of being.
Yeah. I remember John Maxwell's quote. It's not what happens to you, it's what happens in you that matters.
Oh, 100%.
And I was jotting some notes down. One of the things you said, it reminded me 2 things. One, Kermit the Frog meme, drinking the Lipton tea with the caption, "It's none of my business," and how often that you say be the change as opposed to complaining about circumstances and hoping for change, that it's somebody else's, because I call it the lazy river ride. You've gotten on a lazy river raft and you're just floating along. And my wife absolutely despises this sentence I'm going to use. It kills me, and I've come to adopt her viewpoint. It kills me when people go, "Oh, it is what it is," and that's such a surrender of your will and everything. And scripturally, I don't know what scripture it is, but it comes to mind. Without vision, you perish.
Oh, it's one of the lines I use in one of my talks around the whole idea of vision. Because, see, and the thing is, too, around the vision piece of it, I'm so glad you brought this up, Pat, is that what we focus on will expand. So if we're clear on our vision and we're positive around it, we'll start seeing positive things that will help us attract that vision to us. But if we focus on just the negative aspects of it and the obstacles, we'll see those too, because what we're looking for, we'll usually see.
If whatever you're looking for, you'll always find more of it.
That's right. There you go. I love it.
And remember the old psychology trick or whatever is in the counseling and in the life coaching arena, you're trying to get them to articulate what is it you're looking for in your life. Mm-hmm. And usually that prosperity, that control, they just don't know how to find it. And then I would tell them, well, here's what I want you to do is for the next week, I want you to go out and I want you to look for red Volkswagens, and then come back and tell me how many did you find this week? And we meet, a week later, and they'd give me a number, and I would say, "Did you realize there was that many red Volkswagens in your community?" Well, no. I go, "That's because you weren't looking for them."
For him, 100%.
And so I think that what you're saying, those qualities of being the change, and looking, and there's a kid last year the Roman Catholic Church canonized him as a saint,
Mm,
and he born in 1991, died in
mm,
2006.
mm.
Uh, in Milan, Italy. He was not American, and he's actually considered kind of the patron saint of technology and the internet for young people.
Mm.
And there's a whole story behind that. But one of the most impactful statements that he made, and it's been documented, that I've really uh, uh, kind of am attracted to. It was this: is we're all born unique, but sadly, many of us die a photocopy of somebody or something else.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's one of the a quality of leadership. And I don't know
Yes.
if it kind of it resonates with me from what the first two principles that you shared,
Yeah.
because that's the notes I wrote down.
Well,
Um,
it's really interesting what you just shared about that young boy in Italy and being true to yourself. I mean, that really kind of leads into the third quality of black belt leadership, which is integrity, you know,
yeah.
and integrity, oftentimes we think about that as being honest in our communication, right? Which I think is
Mhm.
a very, very, very important quality to have. But it's also about being congruent and being in integrity with who you are as a human being and your values. And in fact, if you ever look at the word integrity from an engineering standpoint, this table that my computer's resting on right now is in integrity because it's structurally sound,
Mhm.
right? But we as human beings, if we are not in congruence with our values, we're not structurally sound
Yeah.
as much as we want to say, right? And so it's about identifying that and then also doing that through our word and through our deeds. And one of the things I often will tell my coaching clients in particular is there's a difference between keeping your word and being true to your word, right? So everybody wants to, they'll say, I'm going to be there. I'm going to meet you today. We're going to do this podcast today at 2:00, right? And keeping my word would be, I'll be there at 2:00, but sometimes things happen. It didn't today, thankfully, but let's say I get late. Well, many of us, we say we're going to keep our word, but then we're off and we don't. We show up at 2:05, but we don't say anything about it. We just kind of go on. And that over time develops into a habit,
Mhm.
right? Yeah, I'm a little bit late. I'm kind of there, etc. Keeping your word versus honoring your word. Now, honoring your word is knowing I'm going to make mistakes sometimes. But if I know I'm going to be late for that 2:00 meeting, I'm calling in advance. Hey, Pat, I had something. I'm caught up in traffic. I'm on my way, and taking responsibility for that. But
Mhm.
many of us don't do that. So then over time, it's like having a bucket with a bunch of holes in it. And our integrity, our word begins to lose its meaning. And when we show up that way, but not only that, but it's what we start not believing ourselves because we don't start believing that we're going to follow through on things. And so that's
Yeah.
why that for me is such an anchor in black belt leadership is that, and it doesn't mean I don't mess up. We all mess up,
Right.
right?
Right.
But honoring your word is saying, hey, I messed up here. This is what I'm going to do to make up for this, et cetera, because otherwise it becomes a really disempowering habit.
And the next progression in that linear analysis, yeah, everything begins with the thought.
Yeah.
Then attitudes is a settled way of thinking, displayed in behaviors. Repeated behaviors become habits,
Mhm.
and then habits become your culture, what you expect and accept from yourself and others. And if the culture is, yeah, you have the judo mindset of deflect and redirect. I'm not going to hold myself. Well, yeah, I didn't make that meeting because somebody cut me off and try.
Right.
It's all those kinds of things, and then it becomes easier to be complacent,
That's right.
and that it's none of my business.
Yeah.
And that integrity, I liken it to this: you can do the right thing, but if you do it at the wrong time, the wrong way, or for the wrong reasons, it doesn't matter that it was the right thing.
That's right.
That integrity has to answer all four of those questions. Am I doing the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons? And
Yeah.
then that becomes your habit, and then people will emulate that. I want to follow you because you're a person of integrity.
That's right.
So that's so that's the first three. Number four.
Number four. Okay, I got it right. It's called conscious persistence.
Okay.
And so the reason I title it conscious persistence, because of course I just, said before, a black belt's a white belt that never quit. And that's certainly showing persistence. But many of us are persistent in our lives, but we do it unconsciously. So case in point, have you ever left work, driven home, 30 minutes on the road, you drive up in your driveway and you have no idea how you got home because your thoughts were everywhere else, right?
Yep.
And so many of the times we aren't conscious about where we want to put our energy, because as you said before, just doing the right thing, but at the wrong time, you might be persistent about doing what you think is the right thing, but you're unconscious as to the timing on it, to use your analogy. So what we want to be able to do, I believe, as effective black belt leaders, is we want to be able to be conscious during the course of obstacles, right? We want to take a step back and make sure that we're responding to difficulties, not reacting to difficulties, right? How many times have you been upset, something comes out of your mouth, and then later on, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. And what ends up happening is when we're conscious about it, I think martial art training does that, because whether you're doing a belt testing, you're in a class, you're in a competition, you have to learn how to work under pressure. Just like I know you did in, almost 30 years in law enforcement. You need to learn how to delineate those challenging times. And when we're able to do that, that creates the confidence too. And I also think that in this whole idea of challenge that we're having is also, there's an important piece of the questions that we ask ourselves, right? And I think it was Tony Robbins that said the quality of our life is in direct proportion to the quality of questions we ask ourselves. So when we're in difficult times and we're like, why is this happening to me again? Why does this always, why is, well, pretty soon what happens is we're going to get really crummy answers. But if we look at a situation, say, what's really happening here? Okay, why is that? How can I use this as a learning experience? How do I need to be? What do I need to do? And what will I have if I am conscious in this situation? Now we grow as human beings and as black belt leaders.
Yeah. That's great advice. That's one of the hardest things, I think, in the human existence is to not react emotionally. And, all the psychology of, and we're trained to think this way. We have accepted these are the natural responses to unexpected intrusions on our safety, our security, our prosperity, or our control, and that is flight, forget everything and run. Or I tease that the Irish way is, hey, ignore it long enough, maybe it'll go away on its own, or it'll get a different problem will take its place,
Right.
or you freeze, you don't know what to do, and you're lost, if you will, and or you come out swinging, and fight, and and all the psychology, you are brought up with it. We do it with our kids in uh, active shooter. First thing to do is run. If you can't run, then do this, and we're reinforcing when in reality, no, there is a fourth option, and that's to have an intentional, decisive response that isn't driven by emotion. And we we would teach cops this, that on a way to a call, you're going to a robbery in progress, you're going to a shooting, is you're rehearsing in your mind, when are you going to turn your, black out your lights, turn your lights and sirens off, or communicate with somebody else that's responding. Hey, you go to the front, I'll go to the back, and we're coming up with a strategy before we actually arrive. But we don't do that in our everyday lives and on the simple stuff. We go to a church that has 2,600 families. So that's a lot of people. We have 5 masses just on Sunday.
Okay.
But if you train your mind to intentionally, be situationally aware, and I don't mean paranoid, but you're aware of your environment. And as you're walking up to the front door of the church and there's people behind you, that intentionally I go, oh, the right thing to do, right time, right way, and right reasons is I'm going to open the door and let people come in first, because that shows respect, all those kinds of things. And then that becomes second nature, becomes your habit.
Yeah.
You will start when the more serious challenges and obstacles, like you get, a family member gets that cancer diagnosis, or somebody dies unexpectedly. Yes, you have an emotional reaction of sadness or what am I going to do? But you trigger it almost instantly into that intentional response. So,
well, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I taught that for years and still do in martial arts. Like one of the most effective techniques that I would teach my students, particularly, let's say they're getting ready for competition, or in many more instances, getting ready for their black belt test, which is, it's an ordeal. It's an ordeal. And I'll talk a little bit more about how they prep for that. But one of the things I have them do, particularly in the week leading up, as they kind of pull back on their training so that there's, they're healthy and they're rejuvenated before that testing on a Saturday, is using visualization techniques. I mean, those were incredibly powerful for me when I was training and competing. And I once had one of my coaches tell me, say, Chris, if you're going to fantasize, you might as well win.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But many of us, because we just default, into the worry, into the fear, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of what might go wrong, and have a contingency plan for that. That's not what I'm saying. You don't want to have your head under the rug, but at the same time, visualize yourself reacting positively and being able to handle situations, as you said, before you're going on a call of a robbery. I think that is an incredible tool for us to have. And it could be taken over into business, before a presentation or a difficult conversation with an employee. All those things is having that rehearsing done so that you can respond versus react.
Yeah. And I know you do it, and I'm doing it. I'm getting a TEDx ready presentation. I hired a coach.
Yeah.
And that visualization, because you can't have, no cards or anything else.
Right.
And you got 13 to 15 minutes, and to literally close your eyes and visualize and go through the presentation.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched it's the Thunderbirds? Was it?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry, not the Thunderbirds, the Blue Angels.
It was the documentary.
Yeah, where they sit around the conference table, and they're in their positions, the number 1 plane and number 2, through 6, and they literally close their eyes and do the entire air show physically, moving, the stick and the verbal, the calls, and all that, and they visualize it. And then what I thought was, okay, that's incredible. But the after action, they get after the show, they sit down,
right,
and they do a critique, but it's not the boss critiquing the other. It's not the number 1 guy. It's you critique yourself. What'd you do well?
100%.
What? Oh, I could have made that turn, maybe a tenth of a second faster. And then they end with, and I'm honored to be a member of this team. And when you take your principles into the business world or into, careers, it's not just the martial arts.
Right.
You know, because I remember my son what's that wooden thing you got to kick and
Oh, the Makawara?
yeah,
Makawara?
I'm like, man, that looks like it hurts. uh, but taking that discipline and principles.
Yeah.
So number 5,
Number
what's
5.
yeah, I
Number
feel like
5 is tough.
we're doing the top 10 songs
Right.
of the
Yeah,
year.
exactly. The top 10 countdown. So this is probably my favorite. And I call this compassionate service.
Okay.
So I just have a innate belief that each and every one of us has been given innate gifts that we're here to share on this planet in this experience.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that we're here. And I've always loved a quote by a man named William Arthur Ward. He says, "We must be silent before we can listen. We must listen before we can learn. We must learn before we can prepare. We must prepare before we can serve. And we must serve before we can lead." We must serve
Wow.
before we can lead. So one of the things within the martial art program that I've created over the years is my students not only they have something it takes them 3 to 3.5 years to get eligible to test for their black belt. And once they get there, prior to their black belt testing, they have a 4-month period, 16 weeks, that is called their black belt candidacy program. And during that time, they have to do several physical things. They have to do 4,000 push-ups, 4,000 crunches. They have to run 40 miles. They have to practice their kata like so many hundreds of times, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that in and of itself is wonderful and a great discipline. But what I'm probably most proud of is what they have to do on a personal development standpoint. So they have to do 400 random acts of kindness. So, and these are logged, and to date, we have well over 250,000 random acts of kindness that we've logged. Now, I misspoke a little bit. Kids only have to do 300, but then they have to do 100 home chores. So parents love them, right? They have to mentor someone for 10 sessions. They have to eat clean for an entire week. They have to log their diet and no sugar, no processed foods, no alcohol. You know, getting 10-year-olds off beer is tough, but I make it happen. and then the one that I absolutely love is they have to spend a day in empathy, meaning a full 24-hour period where they have to spend that time either being blind, deaf, mute, or in a wheelchair. And the reason I have them do that, they have to choose only one of those. They choose that so that they have an empathetic aspect to how they're looking at life. When they see someone who is disabled and has a malady of some sort, they, number one, gain appreciation for their full skill level and their ability to use their body. But I just think one of the things we're lacking most in our world is we do have a lack of empathy because we're so myopic and thinking about ourselves. And so this gives them the time to slow it down. And now understanding that the power that they gain from being in martial arts, the best thing you can do from that is serve from that powerful place. And that to me is what, that makes the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And I've often said, I think that every kid should get their black belt. Why? Not only to have the confidence themselves, but if they grow up in an environment of the power of service, now that moves forward into all aspects of their lives.
Wow. I'm getting a lot of notes here. That you talked about that we're here for a purpose, and it reminds me of the quote from Jeremiah that before you were conceived in your mother's womb, I knew you, and the word for "knew" means I love you. And before you were born, I consecrated you for a purpose. Yes. And part of our task and our challenge, if you will, is to take that journey and discover what that purpose is. Right. The other thing you shared, man, ego is the enemy, that self-centeredness. Yeah. Now this I'm going completely off script, only because I've trained a lot of cops here in Colorado, along with several other people. Specifically, it was a state of Colorado grant-funded free training that we could train every cop in the state of Colorado on interacting with people with developmental disabilities or intellectual or developmental disabilities, IDD. I'm just throwing this out there. One of the challenges you may have in that 16 weeks,
Yeah.
particularly with kids that are of school age, is, hey, for whatever, 24 hours or for a whole week, you have to identify, because most disabilities are uh, hidden.
Mhm.
Yeah, the wheelchair, the blind, the Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's different disabilities you readily go, oh, and because it's visible, I think it's easier for us to be empathetic with that person.
Yeah.
It's the ones that are ADHD, ADD, dyslexic,
Yeah.
all the other things that are hidden disabilities, or they're on some level of the autism scale, and you think the kids, being rude,
Right.
or oh, they're just an introvert, is to create a challenge of, hey, now here's your task.
Yeah.
How can you be empathetic and not sympathetic,
Right. 100%.
but
Big distinction there. Yep.
yeah, empathetic and compassionate, and reach out, and not for selfish reasons, but how could you, connect with that person and experience, and understand, their life and what they're going through, and what are you going to do about it to
Right.
be
I
to be
love
that change.
I love that. I love that. And it's interesting because we have a high degree of kids that come to us in the martial art program that are dealing with those issues.
Hmm.
Because ADHD is definitely recommended by many pediatricians, or martial arts is recommended for kids with ADHD, right? The other thing too that, and I kind of went over it relatively quickly, but one of the things that I always we coach our students on is, if you're going, first of all, we ask them to do the day of empathy in a day when they're going to be active in their regular lives, right?
Mm.
So, we don't say, okay, I'm going to be deaf mute, and they sit on the couch all Sunday. They
Yeah.
just don't, right? That's not what we're, so we want them to be integrated into their regular lives. But what we specifically tell them is, don't show up in your classroom one day and going, I'm blind, right? Not fair to the teacher, but go to them a week or two before and say, hey, I'm doing this. And what my experience has been in doing this for 20 years now, these exercises, is teachers oftentimes really welcome it, because it gives them the opportunity to do some teaching, just like you're talking about empathy in the classrooms. And there's actually studies, Pat, that I've read where, when there is a child with a disability within the classroom, it actually lifts test scores and everything within the entire group of kids for the entire classroom, because living in that empathetic state allows them to be more in their, they can learn at a better rate because of that. So I just think that it's brilliant, and how that can impact. And I've had literal teachers tell me, that when I've gone and visited schools, how impactful it was when our students came and did those exercises.
Wow. Okay, 6 and 7.
6 and 7. All right, here we go. So number 6 is acceptance and surrender. Now, I want to make sure, is like, what's a martial art guy talking about? Surrender. When I use the term surrender, I don't mean giving in. I mean giving up the thought patterns, the practices and things that don't serve us anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the examples I use, one of my favorite movies of all time, is The Last Samurai. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a scene where Tom Cruise, is going to fight the samurai master, and he's getting his butt kicked. And his friend says, "You use too many mind." And what he meant by that is, your mind is here and your mind is there, but you're not focused on what's in front of you. Surrender into the present moment, right? Yeah. And from that place, now we can be. And so many of us, we hold on to these patterns that we've learned from the time we were kids, and they don't serve us any longer, but we use them because they're familiar. So surrender is letting go of those things that don't serve us. And also, in my world of coaching, acceptance is one of the first steps in transformation. So it doesn't mean that you say, oh, this has happened to me, I give up, and I can't do anything about it. It's like, No, I accept this is the situation that's before me, but now this is what I'm going to do about it.
Yeah.
Because if you're constantly fighting what's in front of you, you're wasting energy, right? It's like, I'm pushing, they're pushing, but if I accept it and I flow with it, now I'm able to deal with it. So that's my definition of acceptance and surrender.
Wow. Read this book. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's called Deliberate Discomfort by Jason Van Camp, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Special Forces.
Yeah.
And it's the stories told by two living Medal of Honor recipients. But the stories are all out of their military experiences, whether they got their legs blown off or whatever it was. And he calls it discomfort. A lot of us would go, "Oh man, that's so tragic," and or look at the tunnels, the towers, people, and what they're doing in the lives of severely disabled veterans. But it's that whole concept of not giving up, surrendering, but accepting, hey, I don't have two normal legs anymore. That doesn't mean I can't run a marathon.
Exactly.
And so that's I put it in kind of that category of, you can't control always what happens to you, but you can control your response and accepting your circumstances. It's I'm allergic to gluten, kind of deal. Okay, that doesn't mean you're now going to be drinking water and eating rice for the rest of your life. There's so many things out there. If you intentionally accept it, surrender that ego of, but I really like French bread, or okay, surrender that. And from your spiritual psychology background and experience, one of the things that we most fail at is having that spiritual quiet time. And and I know in Eastern philosophies and meditation, mindfulness, I get all that from a spiritual standpoint, particularly for Catholics, is to have that prayerful meditation time. We call it contemplative prayer, or saying the rosary and doing and spending time in quiet to help recenter and focus your body, mind, and spirit are aligned. So,
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, probably don't have time to do it on this podcast. Maybe we have another conversation. Not that I'm inviting myself back, but I have something called the 6 M's of morning mastery that I teach. And the first one is called meditation. Now, when I say meditation, it's not necessarily sitting on a pillow chanting Om, although it could be, but it is about that quality time. And I've been doing that practice myself for at least 15 years. I think it's the most important thing that I do in my life, to start every day with those practices. And that's one of the first things I do. I think that we live in a world that is incredibly busy, and we can be distracted by all sorts of things. We carry something in our pocket all over the place that has got more computer power in it than the lunar module that landed on the moon in '69, but we use it to argue with strangers and watch cat videos, right? We're constantly, you know what I mean? We're constantly having our attention, but there's nothing more precious and sacred, in my opinion, than that quiet time of connecting with ourselves and whatever God is, however we choose to define it. During that time, I think it's incredibly powerful.
There's a study that came out recently, said the average attention span of a human being is 7 seconds, and a frog is 9 seconds.
That's right. I've heard something similar. It's true, man. It's true. And I find myself having to deal with that too. I'm like, but I get to travel when I speak. And next time you go to the airport, just watch people, and you'll see 70, 80% of them have no clue of what's going on around them. They're glued into their phones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Number 7.
Number 7, here we go. It is called inspired action. And so I always like to quip, there's 3 types of people on this planet. There's people that make things happen. There's people that watch things happen. And then there's people that look around and say, what just happened? Right. And the idea is, who do you want to be? And I think that it's so important for us, we live in a world right now where there is an incredible abundance of, you can go and get the best teachers in the world. You can go on YouTube, and there's so much information out there, but it's what you're doing with it, right? It's really what you're doing with it. And I think that many times people will play in that world of personal development but they're not taking action on it. So it doesn't become transformation. It becomes entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of small actions, even if you do small actions, if you do them consistently over time, can lead to massive results. And an example I like to use, in fact, I'm literally going to be in Colorado Springs doing a speech on Saturday, and I'm going to be sharing this concept. And the idea is that small actions, if you consider that, let's say you wanted to get, Pat, you wanted to get 1% better at a specific activity, whatever it is. Each and every day, you committed to get 1% better on a specific activity over the course of a year. At the end of the year, statistically speaking, you'd be 37 times better than when you started, right? Because 1% each and every day. And then I'll ask the audience, so what happens if you did that activity and you got 1% better each and every day over 2 years? And most people would think, well, I'd get 74 times better because that's, 37 times 2. But that's not what would happen. You get 1,400 times better, because good habits don't add up. They compound, just like compounding interest. And if you maintain that 1% increase every day over 5 years, you'd be 76 million times better. Right? Because it's compounding on each other. So it's like actions don't have to be huge. They just have to be consistent and can be small, but it's going to build up over time. So what I always do with my coaching clients, with my students and my audiences when I get to speak is, what's that one thing you can commit to today that you can get better at each and every day? And what's the difference at the end of a year? Imagine the difference that you can make.
Yeah. And you may never know the rest of the story. The personal development part you might, but you may never know how you impacted somebody else's life because of that. And I don't want to say chuckle, laugh, ha, funny, but people will be resistant to what you're talking about. That doesn't, that doesn't really work. And then just ask them, hey, do you know what the butterfly effect is? And, oh yeah, what happens in the Amazon affects. Okay, you'll believe that even though you've never seen a butterfly or whatever in the Amazon. You believe that theory, but you don't believe that for your own personal development and happiness and future, that there's a butterfly effect that you can have in the lives of others and stuff. So yeah, the other note I wrote, because I wrote butterfly effect, the other note I wrote was the danger that so many of us buy into, because we have, like you said, they're buried in their devices, binging on Netflix, all these different things. And there is so much sensory overload that we aren't inspired. We get burned out.
That's right.
So that, I think that, you were talking about the acceptance and surrender. What are the things that are overloading you?
Sure.
That you have the power and control to go, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Right.
And I'm going to create healthy habits.
Yeah.
And I tell people, repetition's the mother of all learning. And I know there's some debate on that in the psychology world and elsewhere, which I get. But then I always say to people, how'd you learn your ABCs? That stupid song. and you just kept singing it and singing it and singing it, and that's how you learn. And right now you're singing it in your head because I brought it forward. Well, I'm triggering that repetition concept is a reality. So what are you repeating in your daily life? And yeah,
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you're talking to a martial art guy.
Yeah.
I mean, we rep everything, and we say a black belt is nothing more than the master of the basics.
Yeah.
Right. That's what a black belt is. And so we practice our basics. I trained yesterday. Okay. I did my martial art workout yesterday. I started with my basics.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I happen to agree. I always say, repetition is the mother of skill and variety is the spice of life. So find creative ways to do your basic skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As well as, and I got this idea from James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits. He talks about the idea of stacking habits. So for instance, let's say you wanted to practice positive affirmations and you wanted to read them every morning. Rather than creating a whole new habit, put them on your bathroom mirror and read them while you're brushing your teeth, because you've already established the habit of brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon it becomes a come along habit.
Yeah. Oh man. We are going to have you back on. You didn't invite yourself. I'm inviting you.
Okay, good.
Because I'd love to hear the morning routine and all, because that's how our day starts.
That's right.
And even if you work midnight and your morning is at 4 p.m., but it's still it's the foundation. I mean, that's when you plant your feet on the floor, that's when the things start.
That's right.
Wow, man, Chris, it was so great to have this conversation with you. I'm so glad we were able to connect, and man, we're only like 35, 40 minutes apart physically. Right. So offline, we're gonna go grab coffee or something.
Okay,
I want to hear more of your story. For our audience, I hope this today's episode resonated with you, that it's inspired you. And if you know somebody that needs that same inspiration, share this with them. And it's because of you. We're in 32 countries on 6 continents, and that warrior servant leader community has grown. From day one of this podcast, there was 14 downloads, and we're well over 4,000 now. And it's because of that community you guys are building. And I'm just honored to be a small part of it. And as I end every episode, I always encourage you to do the right things at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what a warrior servant leader does every day, every time. Hey, thanks all. Love you. And we'll see you next week.